Good morning. I'm Chris. Hi, Chris. It's nice to feel welcome. Thank you. I've got my own front row right here. You know, every once in a while you'll hear them say, "Preach it, Brother Chris." So you know, it's they're my own little audience up here. Anybody who wants to join us can. No. And as Mike said, this morning we're going to continue on in the book of Genesis. We did 1 and 2 last week, chapters 1 and 2, and we're going to do 3, 4, and 5. And I just realized last night when I was talking to Jackie that 5 was on my agenda, so it was a little late in the game, but not as late as 4 o'clock came this morning. And this morning I woke up around 4. Jackie had said, "What are you going to talk about tomorrow?" We were sitting out on the deck. She said, "What are you talking about tomorrow night?" So I gave her some sort of vignettes, some parts and things, and not put together in any particular way. But I went to bed and thought, well, I'll assemble that in the morning. And at 4 o'clock, I woke up to a distinct message that said, "You're missing the point." And so I got up, and Jackie came out. I guess it was about 4:30 when you came in and said, "What are you doing?" The lights are all into the house. And I don't know. I'm awake. And so my apologies. Kelly, who's doing all of this wonderful work with outlines and so on, I assembled this outline last Wednesday, I think. It's just fiction. And even the title was wrong, and I'm so apologetic for this title. Oh, you took it off. I'm not even going to say what it was, except that it was an exhortation, and last week I told you I'm never going to exhort, and it at least had that feel to it. And then I came in and I saw this. Sin always has its consequences, and these could be dripping letters, and that would, and that's probably all that's left to make this really make us feel. This is not my message, by the way. This is not even my little thing here. I think this is canned. Somebody found it somewhere. But I was talking to a friend of mine this week, a friend like me that was brought up in strong Calvinist teaching, total depravity, all of that stuff. And this is the message that, it's like this. We wear it everywhere. And he said, I said, "Well, how are you doing?" And he said, "I'm doing fine." And he's asked if he might do a little teaching. I said, "I'm not sure I trust you. I hardly trust myself on this because of where I came from." And he said, "No, Chris, I've been giving an awful lot of thought to why do I spend so much time on sin when God's not paying any attention to it? He's gotten past it. He got past it a long time ago in His grace. How come I keep spending so much time in it?" Sort of the feeling I've got about it. Not that it's not important, but you're not going to hear much about it here today. What will you hear about today? Last week we left the creation in pretty good shape. Things looked okay. God was providing all of these choices, and they were all good choices. And Adam and Eve were gardeners. Sometimes I dream of being the kind of gardeners they were, where they just garden to garden. Pick a tomato now and then, dig up. But they're not doing it because they got to go to work tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. They're just gardeners. It's like, wouldn't that be great? So that's fine. They're naked. They're comfortable in their own skin. Everything seems fine. They're not afraid of anything. They're not ashamed of anything. But we know there's trouble brewing in paradise, right? There's a tree. It's not a good tree. And there's a serpent. And so it can't last. And indeed it doesn't. So I was wondering to myself, why is that? Well, let me back up. So if I was missing the point, what is the point of all of this? And the word that came to me was faith. The point is faith. And I tried during the first service to kind of work that in here and there. But as I was trying to work it in, because it was a new idea to me at 4 o'clock this morning, I was thinking that it's the key. Faith is the key that opens the door to the tree of life, the one that we've been excluded from by eating of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. faith is the key. And whether or not I'm able to come back to that in this or not, we'll see. But it's in wondering about the tree. What's wrong with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? What's so bad about my wanting to know? And by the way, some translations say good and bad. Some say good and not good. You can choose. They're meant to be polar opposites, whatever they are. But I find myself wondering, why is that to be avoided? What's wrong with running my life in a way to avoid discomfort and to find comfort, or avoid things that are detrimental to me and find things that are beneficial? Why is that so bad? And it is a question of faith. It's where I put my faith. The point is, for me, it's I'm trying to find it for myself rather than the provisions. You know, and when we were going through Genesis last week, the first 2 chapters of it, there's at least 6 places where God says it's good. He's the standard for what's good. And He's telling us that. He's also the standard for what's not good. It's not good for man to be alone. And everything else is up to us. But God is asking, let me provide for you what is good, what I can know, because God can know. What I can know as Chris is such a tiny, tiny slice of what's good and bad. I'm not connected the way God is. I'm not omniscient. I'm just sort of like Him. I'm in His image. But I don't know all the connections out there. I can't tell what's really good, and I'm certainly not a fortune teller. I can't see what's out in the future. So I don't even know what's going to happen when I say something's good. And I don't know about you. For me, it's almost better for me. It's like I'm dyslexic. You know, if I think I should go left, maybe I should go right. The trouble is, how many times am I going to go around that loop? Oh, well, maybe I'm trying to overcome my own problem. So I don't know quite what to do about it. But I do know that my choices for what I thought was good in my life so many times have turned out to be resoundingly bad. And the things I thought were bad turned out to be resoundingly good. And, you know, best that I don't try too hard. Best that I turn over my will and my life to the care of God, if I can possibly do that. And I try to do that many times a day and fall back. It's like, you know, quitting smoking. I can quit smoking. I've done it 1,000 times. I can quit going to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but I'm back again. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my story, because that's the only place I know to start, and it's the only thing I know much about. And it's about a particular aspect of it. It's about setting a goal for myself, saying, I know what's good for me. I know the thing that's good for me. I'm going to do that. And I'm not going to listen to anybody else, God or anyone, because that's what's good for me. And it's the occupational part of my life. It's not all of it, but it consumed 45 years of it. And it started out, I'm going to start it at the place where I had just gotten my degree, my PhD, and my PhD advisor took Jackie and me, my wife Jackie, who's down here, to me to dinner. And he wasn't with his wife. He just took us, which is kind of a strange deal, but he wanted to tell us his story. And his story went like this, that he had graduated just where I was at that age, and he had decided he would pursue the academic route. He was going to go and reach for that. His goal in life, the thing that he thought was good, was to reach for that coveted, tenured, full professorship at a prestigious university. That's what he was after. And he got into the snake pit that we call academia, where people compete for those, and there's very little room at the top. And he did all the things that people did. Among those were, he hid from others his ideas. He kept away from people because there's something, they even have a name for it in academia. It's called scooping. They want that position so badly they will take somebody else's idea and publish it, and that puts them on the ladder even further. There's a lot of nods going around. People have been in this place, it seems like. It's a really bad place to be. And furthermore, it's very political. And, you know, the best I can say about it in polite company is brown-nosing runs rampant, and people in academia sell their souls. And so my mentor, Bill Simpson, told of this story and said, and finally he got there. He got the coveted full professorship. There he was, tenured, couldn't touch him. He was divorced. His children wouldn't speak to him. He was estranged to his daughters. He had no friends. He'd given it all up. He detached himself, as Mike was saying, from the community of creation. He detached himself for all that was good by paying attention to what he thought, to what he was defining as good for himself. And I think that story to me tells me about why it's so insidious to eat from that tree. Because it starts off pretty benign. It starts off, what's wrong with it? Just as I was saying, all I want is some information. And I think, Eve said, oh yeah, it's good for wisdom. That's what it says in the text. It's good for wisdom. Well, what's wrong with that? The trouble is that pretty quick, it turns me inward. It turns me inward to my own goals and my own plans. And then the next step is that I become indifferent to what's going on outside of me, to the people that I may be harming in pursuing my own goals. And since now it's full-blown narcissism, I've become to feel really attracted to myself at this point. And I'm speaking of myself because I've been there and done this. I'm not only indifferent to them, when something happens, I can't admit to myself, something bad happens, I can't admit, I caused that? No, I would never cause it. So I start to blame and I start to resent those around me. They may have had nothing to do. In fact, they probably did have nothing to do with where I am right now. But pretty soon I wish ill will on them. And that's evil. And so I think when it says it's the tree of good and evil, it's ironic, but it's true that in pursuing what I think is good for me, I have to be awfully careful. In fact, I didn't avoid it. I did not avoid becoming the face of evil for a lot of people. So what is that all about? I'll tell you some of my story. I'll tell you the occupational story. I took the business route out of school. We founded a little business here in Bend, Oregon, a little research company, and it started to grow, and pretty soon I was a vice president. And I did it, in retrospect, I did it for the reason that I wanted to extend my own ego out. I wanted to have people working for me. I thought I had all these wonderful ideas, and wouldn't it be great to have this little cadre of slaves that could do work for me. And so that's really the reason I got into it. I wasn't enough for me. I had to have other people doing these things. And I pursued that goal. And by the way, I tell these stories not out of any self-flagellation. I'm not whipping myself or anything. I tell it because it helps me to be honest among faces like this. It helps me to tell that story so that just for today, I won't go back there again. Because that tree is still waiting for me all the time, every day. That tree of the knowledge of good and evil is always there. And it's available. And so a little bit of my own story is that, to continue it, is that pretty soon I found myself being all consumed by this goal of mine. And I can remember waking up one morning 30-some years ago in London. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and I dashed down out of the hotel, got on the subway, the tube in London that goes over to, and I took it over to Kensington Station, the train station, took a train up to Banbury, did a half-day's business there, came back down again, got a cab, and ended up in Heathrow in time to catch the 1 o'clock Concorde flight. I don't know if any of you remember the Concorde, the supersonic passenger plane. I was corrected this morning. It's not the only one. I forgot, the Russians built one too, called the Tupolev something. Who knows what that was, some number after it. Anyway, I took that plane home, got the 1 o'clock flight, and the Concorde flew so high that I think it's 75,000 feet. You could actually see the curvature of the Earth. And if you looked out the window, it was dark in the middle of the day. And it flew so fast that it was uncomfortable to touch the windows or the skin of the plane. It was hot from the friction of the air going by. It flew at 1,500 miles an hour. And it also flew so fast that it caught up with the rotation of the Earth, so that you would go backwards in time. Not literally, but you would go backwards in time zones. So we left London at 1, and we got back to Kennedy in New York before noon. And that was a metaphor for my life. Crunching more and more hours into the day, extending the day any possible way I could. And I caught a helicopter in from Kennedy into the East River helipad there where the Twin Towers used to stand. And then a cab up to Fifth Avenue, did another half day's of work there, back on the helicopter, back out to Kennedy, back home after 2 more airports, and Jackie picked me up at midnight, bend time at the old Redmond airport. And I remember looking at my watch thinking, pretty good day. You know, business on 2 continents. Well, I don't think, I mean, England's not the continent, but business across on either side of the Atlantic, and then all the way home that night. And then I started sort of bleary-eyed looking at it and think, but you've been up for 30 hours. I don't know if that counts or not. And I was really rummy. And I remember Jackie asked me a question, because I'd been over on the continent. I'd been in Europe, and we had friends there. And she asked me, did you see Peter and Lena, some friends of ours in the Netherlands? And I'd been over in the Netherlands. And I don't know. Did I see him? Couldn't remember. I know I had to have seen Peter, the guy, because I'd done business with him. But it turned out I stayed at their house. And I couldn't remember. I was so detached from people and from doing what was important in pursuing this goal of mine. I had lost complete contact with what was important. And I got home that night, got up early the next morning, went in and tried to do a trip report. I sat with my assistant, and she said, you know, Chris, you need to go back and go home and go to bed. And I was trying to figure out what this was, and I couldn't remember faces, I couldn't remember people. And that was my first thought, something's really wrong. Something's wrong with this picture. But it didn't slow me down. I took another bite out of the tree and just kept on going after I got some sleep. And after a few other trips, I realized that I had missed both of my kids walking. When I left on a trip, they were crawling. When I came home, they were walking. I missed their first steps, Jenny's. I came home one night from Japan. Japan was always a bad trip for me. I said earlier in the earlier video that there was always things crawling on the plate, you know, pieces of apple, you had to chase them around. So I never got enough to eat. Anybody ever been to Japan and ate the food? You know, because when you're there and people host you, they love to take you out for the traditional stuff. I can't touch the traditional stuff. Some of it's alive. And so I wasn't feeling good, because I never feel good when I come back from Japan, and I was exhausted and probably bearded and just, you know, strung out. And I came to the door, and Jenny, I don't know, you were 2 or something like that. She came to the door, opened the door, and looked at me and screamed out in terror. She didn't know her own dad. She didn't know who I was. Something was wrong. Kept on going. Kept on going. And, you know, I could go on and on, because I went on for 44 years this way. I got sick. You can't keep doing this. You can't have 30-hour days. And I got sick. I was laid up for 6 months, and the doc said, yeah, you can go back to work if you want to die, or you can stay in bed until this is over. And it was 6 months. And anyway, it went on and on. I think you get the picture. And then 6 years ago, I'm a late bloomer. 6 years ago, the telephone rang in my office, and it was a board member. And he said, you know, I've been talking to some of the management over the weekend. It was a Monday morning. And we're going to reorganize the company without you. And he said, you're too tough on people. And I thought, you know, you ungrateful sot. You know, I mean, look what I've done. I've grown this company. We got 200 people. The shareholders are all making money. You know, what am I, my brother's keeper? And I can remember I was really angry. And I sat there for a while, and suddenly great relief flooded over me. And again, I think this was God. I know this was God saying, you know what? This one's come to an end. It's come to an end. And it was a great gift. And there were sharks circling around outside my door waiting to see what was going to happen. And I closed the door. I had a sliding glass door to the outside. And I called Jackie up and said, I'm going to come home. I want to talk to you about something. And I snuck out the back door, got in my car, came home, and I remember telling her what had happened and saying, I'm not going to fight it. Because this is what typically CEOs do. They fight it. They get a bunch of board members together and it turns into a big war. And I said, I'm not going to fight it. It's time to go. And I was at the peak of my earning abilities at that point, and we had planned another 5 years of work to get enough put together to retire in the style in which we'd become accustomed. And we both decided at that moment this was a good end for that. It had been handed to us on a platter. Why fight it? And so I did. I quit. I left. And I would like to say that I learned like that, not to set more goals for myself, not to eat from that tree, but that wouldn't be the case, because immediately what I decided was, and I know I've shared this from up here before, is this is the beginning of a pina colada vacation that will go to the end of my life. We're going to be going to Hawaii, we're going to do this, that, and the other. I'm going to read the classics. Not one bit of this great plan was aimed at reconnecting with people. Of all the things that I had missed for 40 years. By the way, just to calibrate you, I was 60 when all of these things happened, and I'm 67 right now. So that's why I say I'm a late bloomer. And then, as I've shared before, I got cancer. And, you know, I see death frequently as a gift of grace, and the fear of death as a gift of grace, because it sets us into that place of humility, of understanding that there's got to be more than this. And do I really want to be gone, and this is all that ever happened, and that I wasn't connected to people? And at the same moment I met Mike Juncker, and we began to have conversations, and I came here and I met many of you, and I began to connect with God through people. I went into 12-step recovery, and I began to connect there with people, to hear their stories, to share their stories, the kind of things I talked about last week. And that's been the story since then, is this slow but steady reconnection. So, what's that all got to do with this? I thought you'd never ask. I can find my story in these pages. And you'll be disappointed to know I'm not going to read everything in Genesis 3, 4, and 5. But I wanted to start off by saying, you know, that at the very beginning, there's a serpent. We all know that. But it doesn't sound to me like Eve needs very much pressure. You know, I don't know if it was Satan tempting me, but I feel like, looking back on it, if I'm self-honest, these were my choices. These are choices I made. I don't doubt that he exists. I'm just saying I'm not sure how often he needs to tempt me. And he's a great liar. We know that. And there's a lot of attention paid to the sort of the subtlety of his arguments, and one of them's not very subtle, and that is, he says, no, you're not going to die. God told Eve she was going to die if she ate from that tree. And he said, no, you're not. You're not going to die. That's a lie that God is telling you, because he is holding back the knowledge of good and evil from you. And there is some subtlety there, because what God does is he holds that for us. That knowledge of good and evil, that fact that he is connected, that he knows the outcomes and knows how to maximize the good in any outcome. Those are the things he knows. And he holds that for us. If we just have the faith to connect up with him. And for me, the connection came, as I said, through people and continues to come through people. There's some verticality to this, like I had this morning. You're on the wrong track. But mostly it's storytelling. It's intertwining myself with other people's story. It's learning about them. It's learning to love. So it starts right away. And now I can find my story with no problem in here at all. Eve says she hid. She was afraid. It doesn't say that she was afraid of God, although she certainly was, but she was just afraid. I spent so much of my life being fearful that somebody was going to take this goal away from me. We do have the wherewithal to understand the minute we try to start taking, for me, let me stop saying we. I have the wherewithal to understand once I try to start taking my life in my own hands, there is much to fear. I just have to be honest and see the things that are happening around me. And Eve sees it right away. There's much to fear. But it couldn't possibly be her. She couldn't possibly have these feelings because of something she had done. So almost immediately the blame starts. Just as I blamed the people who were calling me on the telephone for my demise at this company, Eve starts to lie to me. Actually, Adam lies first. He says the woman that you put here. He gets to blame two people in one sentence. The woman and God. The woman you put here gave me the fruit of the tree, and I took it. So she's all ready to take off again. She's managed to get the blame onto somebody else. Or he is, I'm sorry. Adam is. And then And then Eve just says, the serpent made me do it. It's Flip Wilson. The devil made me do it. That's a good way to get out of almost anything. It's a great excuse. As I say, I don't think he made me do it. And then the curses come. And the curses are interesting to me because there's not much to them. They sort of have, they're this much right in here. And they don't tell what anybody's thinking. They don't really say anything. They just sort of set things out. And yet they center up on the problems that we can look at having until Christ comes back. And there's the curse on the serpent as the agent or as Satan himself. And we know that this is going to go on a long time because that curse ends with God saying, the seed of men. So someplace way out there, and it's the person we know now as Jesus Christ in retrospect, so it's a long time. It's thousands of years since this happened. The seed will crush the head of the serpent. This isn't going to end for a long time. As I said last week, I believe creating this kingdom takes a long time. And then to the woman, he says, the two biggest blessings that I've given you, and this is what happened to me so often, is as I started to determine and set my goals and say, this is what's good for me, good and bad would get turned upside down. Things that were good would not be good, and things that were bad would look good to me. And the two greatest blessings given to us are that of children and of marriage. And God says, you're going to turn those on their ear, upside down. Yeah, I know. I get it. Mostly. How about if I say mostly? Mostly those are the two great, but those are the great blessings that he gave us. What we do with them is a different story altogether, but he did give us those great blessings, this marriage which is the divine plurality. It's our image of the Trinity. It's the reason we're to be together with somebody, that we can be vulnerable with, that we can trust, that we can intertwine with them in their stories. But the childbearing thing, all we're going to see is the pain. And child rearing, the pain associated with it. And there's plenty of that, but that's not the blessing. And I'm struck by, I promise this is not a political commentary I'm about to make, but I'm struck by, about 2 years ago, our president, talking about, in his support of abortion, said he hated to think what would happen if one of his two daughters was to ever get pregnant out of wedlock, that if by chance they should make some mistake, he didn't want to see them punished by having an unwanted child. And I'm thinking of those 3 words about the great blessing of children. That it would be a mistake, and that it would be punishment, and that they would be unwanted. This is where we live today. And, you just have to read the news in the recent few days of the domestic problems that are going on in the NFL. But this goes on all over. Men beating up their wives and beating up their children. This thing has been turned on its ear by the pursuit of so many different things and the loss of what our blessings really are. And I've never understood this one very well. When he's talking to Eve, he says, your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you. I'm not sure they've been at our house, but I get it. For most of the world and for most of history, the women's place has been pregnant, barefoot, and in the kitchen, right? And the men have dominated them in that way. And so it's anything but a partnership, the partnership that it was intended to be. And then Adam. This is my curse. And I want to say again, I don't believe these are curses that God has to give to us. He doesn't curse us. This is not a scowly-faced thing. This isn't this. It's not that. This is just what happens. This is our own deal. And he says, cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil will you eat of it. By the way, no more gardening, Adam. You're not going to enjoy the gardening anymore. You're going to see all the weeds. That's what this is going to be all about for you. And like me, you're going to work, and you're not going to be satisfied. It says, by the sweat of your brow you'll eat your food until you return to the ground from which you came. You're going to die again too. You ought to give some real thought to what you're doing, Chris. This is me. So, no trouble finding my story here at all. It's me. And then 3:22, Genesis 3:22, a great little sentence, or a great two sentences. And the Lord said, the man has now become like one of us, knowing good from evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat, and live forever. He's become like one of us. There's only one translation that I can find anywhere that doesn't use the words one of us. And I think it's meant to spell that out. That even God, or a God, if we want to use a small g in that, who tries to have the power over good and over evil, if it's only for them, it will become narcissism, because there's nobody else involved. This idea of knowing what is good and bad without any connection just can't work. And then I think I come back to this idea that maybe death is a blessing in many cases. You know, I mean, what's a better definition of hell than what I was going through in my life? Maybe the best thing to do is just to be taken out at some point. At any rate, death is the consequence. So, that's a pretty uplifting talk, huh? Everybody's smiling and happy? But there's great news. There's great news. And that is that, like me, and like Adam and Eve, God didn't leave. They were rejected from the garden, but God didn't leave them. He's still talking to them. He's still there. He's still offering to them. The tree of life is still there. It's a little hard to get to, but it's there. And we know from reading in Hebrews that faith is the answer. It's still open to those that have faith. So Cain and Abel. Cain's my guy. You know, I told it in my outline I have that it's the story of Cain. Because Abel's dead, right? Abel doesn't last more than just a little while in this story, but we all know the story. Cain's the older son. Why older sons get such a bad deal in the Bible, I have no idea. They're not supposed to. They're supposed to get the blessings, but they don't. It seems that God cares more about the seed than He cares about what we place on the conditions of receiving the blessings of the seed. For whatever reason, Cain doesn't fare well in this, and he gives an offering, and he gives, as we might expect from a farmer, he gives a farmer's offering. And Abel gives the rancher's offering. And God likes the rancher's offering, but He doesn't like the farmer's offering. And He tells him so. He tells Cain that. And, you know, I've had this thought. It's probably blaming again. How come somebody didn't come to me halfway through life? Maybe they did and I didn't hear. I don't know. But why didn't Abel say, "Am I my brother's keeper?" about Cain? How come Abel didn't say, "Hey, bro, I know how to give a good offering. Why don't I show you how?" Or is he the younger brother that's always looking under his older brother's bed for Playboy magazines and pulling them out and waving them in front of his folks? "Hey, look what Abel's got." I don't know, but Abel's responses in this are that this may not be the first time. Anyway, I have great sympathy for Abel. And by the way, I believe God also has great sympathy for Abel. And I'll get into that in a minute. God says something really important to him. He says to Abel, "Why are you so downcast? Why are you angry about this? You've been rejected, but that's not permanent. It doesn't have to be that way. If you do what's right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what's right, sin is crouching at your door and it desires to have you, but you must master it." John Steinbeck wrote a book. Anybody Steinbeck fans here? Okay, East of Eden. It's his thickest book except for Grapes of Wrath, which is I don't know, it's huge. But East of Eden is the story of sibling rivalries throughout this huge, long family down in the Salinas, California area. And it goes over and over again about one favored son or daughter and an unfavored one. And it's story after story about it. But the center of it is this verb. The verb in here that says, "You must master it." That's the way most of the more recent translations are, but if you go back to this, my favorite, which is the Jewish Publication Society, it says, you can. Jen, you nodded your head. You remember? I don't remember what the old Chinese servant's name was, but he was the one who was the biblical scholar in this. And he was the one that said, you can master it. It doesn't have to be this way. I hear this in my 12-step groups so many times. I was so tired of living like this, and suddenly it came to me. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be like this. And God's telling him that. It doesn't have to be this way, Cain. You have a choice. And we know the choice that Cain makes. And again, I don't blame him much. There weren't many people around. So how can you really know? They'd never even seen death happen. And I'm probably cutting him more slack than I really should. But he kills his brother. This brother is a burr in his side. And he kills him. And the Lord says, your punishment is going to be, I'm going to turn you into a wanderer. We can't have you here, Cain. We don't have many people to start with, and you're killing the ones we got. So he sends him out to wander. And what's Cain's response? Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence, and I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. It seems like an overreaction. But Cain sees it immediately. He's going to be disconnected from the community of creation. He's going to be disconnected from all that is important to him. Even though he'll still be alive, because God's going to put a mark on him to keep people from murdering him, he's going to be disconnected from all that he has come to love. And so, this wonderful God of ours, this God of many chances, backs down. You can choose to agree or disagree that he backs down. Maybe he always intended to. I see him as a God that's involved. I see him as a God that is continuing to have conversation, that loves us so much. He gets involved in our story, and he moves along with it. He says, the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, he will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put the mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. And so Cain went out from the Lord's presence, and he lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And then we know what happened next. Somehow, Cain found a wife out there. Now, you got to tell me where this wife came from, because I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm not the first one to wonder about that. But he finds a wife, and God provides for him a city. It's a small city. It's a town. It's just his descendants. But it's a city of refuge. It's a place where he's safe. It's a place where he's protected. And, David wrote, and now I've forgotten the psalm. I remembered it this morning, but I can't remember. 34. That psalm, yeah. The last verse, it's 22 or something. It's the last verse of that psalm, which says that that all that take refuge in the Lord shall not be condemned. And here's this city of refuge. I see it as sort of a big 12-step place. This is Murderers Anonymous, because the whole family turns out to be a bunch of murderers. And yet they're safe there. They're taking refuge in the Lord. And at the very end, it's got Cain's great-great-great-great-grandfather, Lamech, telling his story. And he's telling his story, and he says, I've killed a man for wounding me, and I've killed a young man for injuring me. But if Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. He's protected. He's safe. He can be vulnerable. He can speak about his compulsion, whatever this happens to be, to kill people who don't deserve it. But he's safe. I'm not suggesting that this is a good thing to go out and do, by the way, but I do think that he is protected by God. And at the very end of this, the last sentence in this chapter says, and at that time men began to call out the name of God. Something happened there. I found this so often in groups of people that I've met with, all of us sort of sharing the same issues, compulsions in our lives, the things that are driving us completely crazy. They ought to have, the business run amok anonymous for people like me. But because we do need to share. We need to tell people our stories, and we need to hear other people's, and we need to hear how God has worked in their lives. And to hear this, that they begin to call on the name of the Lord. means to me that this is so important. This reconnection with the community of creation. This is part of the thing that God made that was so good. People. All of you. For me to connect with you, to tell you my story. To have coffee. To do whatever it is, to hear your stories. So, we have a short amount of time left, and I only have 10 generations to cover, from Adam to Noah. This was an afterthought. I just realized it last night when I was talking to Jackie for the first time, that I had to cover this. So instead of covering it in any detail, what I'm going to do is go to the 8th generation, which is Enoch. We all remember another Enoch, not the son of Cain, but another one, a patriarch, Enoch. Enoch was the one that it's written about. Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him away. He was raptured. Somehow or another, Enoch spent, I think he lived 300 years. In 300 years, he never went and fed from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I don't know how that can happen, but I'll bet there's been at least a trillion people on the face of the earth since then, and nobody else has met that standard. So the odds are not with us that we're going to avoid the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it's certainly, I certainly know that. I know it's still there. It's still there, and I know when I feed on it. But Enoch somehow escaped that. 1 out of a trillion. And there's really only one other person that ever didn't feed from that tree of good and evil, and that was Jesus of Nazareth. He was the only other person who didn't have to die. Of course he did. He did die, but he died voluntarily. He died for me. He died for you. He lived, first of all, he lived as an example of faith. He lived of how I should live by faith. Because that was his life. And he died that way. He died by faith as well. And he died for me so that I wouldn't have to suffer, even though I eat from the tree, the wrong tree all the time. The tree of life by faith is still available to me. I can feed on it. We fed on it this morning, these emblems. And we feed on it every day that we're around the creatures, the community of creation, this thing that has been provided for us. The indwelling Christ within all of you and within me is our feeding on Christ. And it's our ability to survive in eternity, to open the key, with the key of faith, open the door and let ourselves into the tree of life. Because Christ has made it possible for us to do that, if we'll just accept by faith what he did for us. So if you would pray with me, I think the worship group can come up. So Lord, we come before you thanking you for this creation story and the story of the fall that you put before us, Lord. I want to thank you particularly, Lord, for allowing me to find my story in there. I find it every place that I look these days. It gives me great hope, Lord, and great faith in you that you know what our stories are. Mine can't be so different than lots of other people's because I find it in these pages. And there's lots of other people reading these pages to find their story in some different way, Lord. But I'm so grateful that you've given us this. But mostly I'm grateful for all of the chances that the conversation with you never stops. That you continue day after day, even in the midst of our eating of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Every day you're pointing the way back to the tree of life. Every single day you're telling us something's not quite right here. And Lord, I thank you in my own life for what you've done. And I ask for your blessings on each one here as they walk through their lives and discover those things about them. In Jesus' name, amen.